Welcome back, everyone, to State of the World 2021, the conference brought to you by Florida International University and its Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs in partnership with the McCain Institute. I'm David Kramer, serving as your MC for this week. And we continue here on day 4 with a terrific panel of people representing a number of different countries and experts. And looking forward to the discussion, which is going to be led by my very dear friend, Damon Wilson, who is Executive Vice President at the Atlantic Council. Prior to joining the Atlantic Council, Damon worked in the US government, including as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for European Affairs at the National Security Council. So Damon, over to you right after this introductory video that we received from Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who is the Belarus Democratic leader, and she very kindly submitted this recording for us to kick off our discussion here this morning. So if we can cue the video, please.
Dear students, faculty, and everyone present, I'm grateful for the invitation by the Florida International University to address the American students and scholars on behalf of Belarusian people. American democracy is unimaginable without the spirit of free discussion and critical thinking, which is cultivated in universities such as yours. For Americans, academic freedom is something to be proud of. For Belarusians, this is what they are now fighting for. When 26 years of the regime of Lukashenko crushed our young and fragile democracy, it started pressing the academic community. The independent universities were closed, and all others were turned into the bureaucratic machines. Students and professors could always be expelled or fired for political activity. They were also denied self-governance, and the administration tried to make profit of them instead of serving their needs. These authoritarian universities were the model of Belarus as a whole. But this summer, something has changed. Belarusians declared that they are the proud nation and not the property of the dictator. They said, enough. In August, Belarusians voted for the changes and they won, but the regime stole their vote and unleashed the unprecedented violence in revenge. Since then, Belarusians have been peacefully protesting daily for almost half a year already. The regime answered by arresting 33,000 Belarusians. Hundreds were tortured and 8 killed. Our struggle for democracy unites all groups of Belarusian society: factory workers and IT developers, retirees and street musicians, people with special needs and priests. Among them, there has always been the brave Belarusian academic community. They were marching 20 kilometers to deliver the letter with demands to the Ministry of Education, but the police were beating them all over their way. Students were singing in the hallways of their universities, but the police were arresting them inside the walls of their alma mater. Scholars were trying to talk to their rectors, but the administration was locking them in the classrooms. Faculty members were organizing strikes, but the administration was firing and expelling them. But the only thing that this violence really means is that those who perform it have no future. There is no future for those who try to frighten the whole generation of young people. Belarusian students and professors are now active and united as never before. And so is the whole Belarusian society. We have already paid the high price, and we can't lose any more lives. And this is exactly why there is no way back for us. We know that our cause is just, and we will go on until we build the new, free Belarus.
What an extraordinary message from Belarus Democratic leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. That's inspiration, and that sets the tone for the conversation we're going to have today. As David Kramer said, welcome back to State of the World 2020, Struggle for Democracy. There's been an extraordinary agenda over the past couple of days, but I think this conversation, this segment is quite special. We're focused on changes afoot in Eurasia. And in a group that is committed to the struggle for democracy, there's an extraordinary time that we're witnessing across Eurasia that we're going to unpack today. So first, thanks to FIU and David Kramer for bringing together such an extraordinary group, and as well as the McCain Institute. I'm so honored to be able to moderate this panel of great friends. These are freedom fighters that have helped develop the intellectual contours of the struggle for freedom, who have really developed the policy frameworks in Europe and the United States to support those in the struggle for freedom, and who have been activists and advocates on the streets, on the world stage. This is the example of principled moral leadership. I'm really honored. With us, we have Natalia Arnaud, who is founder and president of Free Russia Foundation. We have Natalia Kaliata, who is the catalytic force behind the Belarus Free Theater. We have David Merkel, who's managing director of Summit International Advisors at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, with extensive experience on Capitol Hill, at the State Department, at the National Security Council. Žygimantas Paviljonis of the Lithuanian Parliament, Seimas, who's been an ambassador, worked in the foreign ministry, and a freedom fighter to his core. And last but not least, an extraordinary colleague and friend, Lilia Shevstova, who is joining us from the board of the Liberal Mission Foundation. She herself has been an intellectual and moral inspiration and mentor for me. We're going to unpack all of these issues. I want to remind everybody watching online to use the hashtag State of the World 2021 to amplify this conversation, the messages that we just heard, for example, from Svetlana Sukhanovskaya. I also want to encourage everybody who's with us, particularly the students, during the course of the conversation, to put your comments, your questions in the Q&A function. We want to hear from you. We want to engage you in a conversation. But to kick this off, let's pick up on the words of Svetlana. I think I want to start with what's happening on the ground in Eurasia, particularly in Russia and Belarus. We'll start with Belarus, given Svetlana's kickoff, then turn to Russia, to the two, Natalia Kaliata. I'll start with you. I'll turn to Natalia Arnaud and Lilia to talk to us about what's happening in Russia. And then I want to bring in David and Žygis to help talk about the policy framework, the political framework in the United States and Europe and the transatlantic community to support these freedom fighters. So with that, Natalia, from Belarus, if we could bring you into the conversation. We just heard a pretty inspiring message from Svetlana. We've watched with the extraordinary courage and passion of what's been playing out on the streets of cities and towns across Belarus since the stolen election there. Give us a sense of where this is headed and how this looks from the perspective of you, someone who's been a longtime advocate for a democratic Belarus. Is that within reach?
Hello, everyone, and very privileged to be here today with everyone on our panel and everyone who attend such an amazing event to bring attention to major issues in Eurasia. And I think this is exactly that correct and perfect wording in terms of currently we deal not with single countries anymore, but we're dealing with the whole region, with the whole geopolitical knot. And Belarus played a major role last year when major protests started and people made their choice. People of Belarus made their choice even before the 9th of August, so-called presidential elections, when 1,000 people already got arrested and went to jail. And currently we have 200 political prisoners in Belarusian jails. As Svetlana said, more than 30 people got arrested since the 9th of August. And when we have minus 26 Celsius in Belarus, people continue to go out every single Sunday, and they continue to get arrested. Meanwhile, Alexander Lukashenko, better known to the world as the last dictator of Europe, he used COVID as a lethal weapon against people of Belarus, people getting arrested and then infected by COVID in overcrowded cells. They continue to get out of jails and they continue to fight. And today I'm talking in my another hat as I sensed the International Strategic Action Network for Security and Creative Politics Hub on top of Belarus Free Theater, even though our slogan, more than a theater. And it's vitally important, of course, for us to say that we need to understand that even though there are talks about a possible alliance between the West and Moscow to put pressure on Lukashenko, however, for the administration of President Biden and EU and UK, movement in this direction should be completely ruled out, since the settlement in Donbass showed that the Kremlin is not a real partner. Therefore, one should not fuel any expectation regarding the possibility of such alliance. Lukashenko is building concentration camp in the center of Europe. Lukashenko ordered murders to kill his opponents in Belarus in 1999. He ordered murders to kill his opponents in 2012 in Germany and his opponents in 2017 in Ukraine. Currently, death threats are going out to people who deal with Belarusian situation now. And of course, we need to understand that when forming regional support for the development of democracy in post-Soviet transition countries, one should avoid applying templates for the situation in Ukraine, Moldova, and Armenia to Belarus. And this situation are fundamentally different due to political, economic, and social factors. But what is important to say that any single world leader cannot choose his, her favorite dictator to who to bring attention. It's necessary to deal with all dictators at once at that particular region, because Belarus showed the example to Russian people, and we are so happy that Belarusian model making the Russian people to wake up and go and fight for their freedoms. Kyrgyzstan is waking up, Kazakhstan, and jointly we could really try to stabilize the region and also stop war in Ukraine. And I would probably will stop here in order to continue such a major conversation with other panelists.
Natalia, thank you for that. And thank you for those who are just meeting Natalia for the first time, her remarkable courage over the years. I want to come back to this, and maybe Lilia, when I turn to you, you can pick up on Natalia's point about the false promise of cooperation between Russia and the West to put pressure on Lukashenko. But let's stay focused on what's happening on the ground in Eurasia and now move to Russia. And if I can, Natalia, Arno, switch to the extraordinary protests that we see across, unfolding across Russia in the wake of first the assassination attempt against Navalny and now his arrest, the release of the documentary Putin's Palace. Natalia, can you unpack for us the significance of what we're seeing reported across Russia and the prospects for where this is headed?
Thank you so much, Damon, and hello, everybody. And at first, I wanted to thank Florida International University and McCain Institute for organizing such a terrific event. And thank you to my chairman of the board of Eurasia Foundation, David Kramer, for inviting me to this absolutely amazing panel with great panelists. It's a huge honor for me. And I wanted to support Natalia Koleda's words that it's a very correct wording for the name for the panel about Eurasia. And the term Eurasia here underlines how deeply interconnected we are in this region. And we at Free Russia firsthand understand all these interconnections and of what is happening in Russia, in Belarus, in Ukraine, in Kazakhstan, in Georgia. And for example, how Nazarbayev's transition of power in Kazakhstan set up a precedent and a contrast with Putin and Lukashenko, or how the Ukraine's dignity, revolution of dignity, and Belarusian protests affect and impact and inspire Russian activists, or how when we see photos and videos of recent protests in Russia, how painfully they resemble August photos and videos from Belarus. And it was very inspiring to hear what Svetlana Tikhanovskaya said, but it's also very, not only like the coping of repressions, but also Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, as Steve Biegun yesterday said, a real leader of Belarus. Unfortunately, Lukashenko is still the ruler, but Svetlana is the leader. But she also was a the symbol of Belarusian protests. She and Maria Kolesnikova and Veronika Tsepkalo. It was a female, very prominent, very distinguished female face of Belarusian protest. And it impacts Russia as well. Right now, we are looking not only at Navalny, we are looking at Lyubov Sobol, at Yulia Galyamina, at Yulia Navalnaya. Russian journalist asked this question: is Yulia Navalnaya Russia's Svetlana Tikhanovskaya? So it's very interesting to see all this. As most of us on this panel, I was born in the Soviet Union, and when it collapsed, I believed it would never come back. But unfortunately, Putin is reestablishing and improving, unfortunately, all the worst features of the Soviet Union: censorship, propaganda, political and economic monopoly, KGB dominance, and it's continues to exert a very intense gravitational pull on all its neighbors. So we see it through all the bribing politicians, disinformation campaigns, instigating armed conflicts and threats and whatnot. But on the other hand, victories and successes of Ukrainian, Belarusian civil society and activists, of course, impact us, and we learn from that, and it's great to see. What is happening in Russia at the moment is of historically monumental significance. Well, we see, of course, this huge activization of Russian civil society, but also, of course, increased repressions from the Kremlin. And we had protests before. We had big protests in 2011, 2012. It was, as we call, the protest of big cities. After that, I unfortunately had to flee from Russia, and very grateful to see Mr. Paviljonis here. Lithuania was the first country of my exile. I'll never forget it. And I really appreciate how Lithuania responds to the Kremlin as a pioneer in this regard. And many other Western democracies should take Lithuania as an example for that, when they really distinguish between propaganda and journalism and can very determinedly deport all these propaganda soldiers, and many other things that Lithuania is doing is really great. And we had other protests in 2017 after the previously most popular Navalny's video about corruption of Prime Minister Medvedev. We called it the protest of students and school children. We saw protests of 2019 in Moscow, when out of just quite a local event, this turned into a bigger all-Russian protest. But it wasn't still the critical mass of people. Svetlana in her speech said something has changed. What we see now in Russia, maybe still not a critical mass, but it's already something has changed. And Navalny's video about Putin's palace, about his corruption, it's not just a video exposing corruption. It's first of all psychological portrait of Putin, but also it's a vivid explanation how Putin steals from Russian people, why he's doing it, and who is helping him. And so many Russians were woken up by this video. They saw they saw how tasteless Putin is, how with all these billions of dollars he's building that, which is very ugly, tasteless and rotten. And actually it's a very good wordplay, because the palace was actually rotten and they had to rebuild it again, but also because the person who publicly took the ownership for this palace is Arkady Rotenberg, Putin's childhood friend. But also it shut down all the arguments that Putin is an ascetic, or he's a true patriot, or whatever he's doing for the good of Russia. No, this video showed that what Putin is doing he's doing for himself and his family and his friends. And and it's not only that he's stealing money from the Russian people, he's stealing our future. This video about Putin's palace has over 108 million views. Our understanding is that over 60% are from the views from Russia, and we have only 55 million households in Russia. So basically everybody in Russia watched this video. Or we see how much Navalny is now discussed on social media, on TikTok, for example. There were like over 1 billion views on TikTok of all Navalny's videos. It's absolutely amazing numbers. So what we see that out of marginal protests became mainstream. So many, it's now can be just, if before it was protests of big cities or protest of school children or protest of truck drivers or protest, some regional protests, Khabarovsk, Ekaterinburg, it's now protest of people. And also what is also very, very significant is that the Soviet regime, the glue of the Soviet regime was fear. That's why it was able to last that long. The main substance that keeps Putin's regime in power for so many years is fear. And Navalny, with his courageous act of after this attempt of assassination, after his poisoning, after he exposed his hitman, his hit team, and he returned to Russia, it also shows that, again, we shouldn't be afraid. It's his main slogan, don't be afraid. And as Masha Gessen said, if he says it doesn't mean there is nothing to fear. There is a lot to fear. We have, Natalia mentioned political prisoners in Belarus. We have right now more than 350 political prisoners in Russia, but only because memorial that counts political prison hasn't even had time to put all other people who were recently jailed, over 12,000 in just last 2 weeks. Natalia and Svetlana mentioned concentration camp in Belarus. We now have Gulag in Moscow as well. And but even despite that, more and more people are not afraid, ready to take their future in their hands, ready to protest. And what we see now that Putin's regime has its expiration date.
So Natalia, let me just real quick before I move on to Lilia, let me ask the two Natalias. You both implied that something's different. We've seen protests before in Russia and Belarus, and yet we've seen the longevity of Putin and Lukashenko's ability to hold on to power. Just answer me in one sentence for both of you, both Natalias. Is this different? Has something changed? Natalia Kaliata, just one sentence, please.
We are from Eastern Europe, Damon. One sentence. Very difficult issue and challenge.
I'm going to come back to you. One sentence.
One sentence, very simple, yeah. Unfortunately, before the pain was touched only small group of people, and that whole small group of people did everything not for majority to feel it, but now majority feels it. Every single person in Belarus now suffered from a regime. It's existential crisis. It's life and death choice.
So the scope, the scale. And Natalia Arno, what about in Russia? Is something changing? Is this different from the past?
It's different from the past because more and more Russian people understand the situation. They understand that the ruling party, the Kremlin, they have money, and that it's a lie that, and it's very bad for Russian people to live in poverty. We have more than 20 million poor people, and just the situation is terrible. But also because it's different because Russian youth will never, Putin lost this generation forever. So it's a very big generation.
That's one of the key changes.
Yeah.
So Lilia, I want to turn to Lilia Shestova, who, Lilia, you have an extraordinary ability to help us understand analytically, to step back from what's happening in the newspaper today and to put this a little bit in a framework, to help us understand what's happening, what really are the more systemic challenges that Russia's facing in the new future. So let me hand it over to you, Lilia. For the students out there, if you've not watched it, we put in the chat, watch Putin's Palace. It's an extraordinary documentary. But Lilia, over to you.
Thank you, Damon. But if you allow me, I would like to say several words about David Kremer, our friend. Well, you know, I have a long history of attending the conferences, so it's my hobby. But I've never participated in this absolutely exceptional analytical marathon. And I'm not talking only about topics. I'm talking about people. I'm talking about the depth of discussion, and I'm talking about a readiness to get rid of misperceptions. This is really David, you know, praise to you, kudos. This is Florida Davos, but with normative dimension. And it's quite possible, David, that this kind of event will go down into some textbook, and we'll be proud that we were your guests. Okay, now, it's really a treat and fun to take part. And now let me get to Damon's question, if I may. I will put on the table only two factors in a way of brushstrokes, because while our Natalia, the Russian Natalia, did everything to offer a very adequate Russian landscape already. So two brushstrokes to Natalia's landscape. What will influence Russia systemically? This is what Damon wants from me. I would say two factors. Navalny, and I'm trying to formulate Navalny factor in a bit emotional way. For me, Navalny factor has become maybe the beginning of a new Russian Shakespearean drama with all its tragic and existential moments. Because really the man who puts his life on the table, he's unbeatable. He's unbeatable. And he's not only a headache for the Kremlin, he's much worse than a nightmare. He could be nemesis. And Navalny's strength, despite of the fact that only 20% of Russians approve his activity, that his trust approval level today is only 5%, and President Putin is, well, I am having today's data, 29% trust level. You know, Navalny is offering the moral indignation problem for the Kremlin. And sometimes moral indignation is even much more popular, much more effective factor for consolidation in the society. When people are consolidated not only among, you know, those gangs, those groups whom Navalny's minority, but also people who are indifferent, who have been indifferent, but now they cannot stay any longer, you know, this hopeless situation. The problem is that, you know, indignation bringing broader consolidation. Sometimes it brings also uncertain outcome. But there is a rule: when courage is contagious, it could be much more contagious than COVID-19. And when a brave man takes a stand, the spines of others stiffen. And of course, what we have, and this will influence Russia's trajectory, the fact that minority in Russia will be radicalizing, and it will get response, and it's getting response. Natalia was talking about that response, strengthening of the totalitarian reaction on the part of the state. And one more factor, Damon, it seems to me, has to be mentioned here, because sometimes we are too emotional discussing our current situation. Much more systemic factor, which I call, it seems to me Mark Medish used this term, conundrums, talking about the global challenges. So there is Russia conundrum, and Russia conundrum, systemic conundrum, is the following: 60% of Russian people want change. Different kind of change, but change. They're already fed up with the current situation, with the current life, with the current leadership, with the current Kremlin. But at the same time, majority of these people are not ready to take to the street. Part in the protest, but usually 1-2% of Russian population are ready to get beaten. Okay, they're waiting for a change from the top, and what we have on the top: demoralized Russian elite that prefers to live and to survive in the situation of rot and decay. So the result is inevitable conflict between those who want change and those who cannot give them change. So Russia is pregnant with future revolutions. But the impediment is that only moral indignation without strong political alternative, party, agenda, concept, and wide, broad base hardly could bring any transformation. And there is one more impediment for us in Russia: the fact that we don't have any more the role model. We don't have an example to follow. Crisis of liberalism, crisis of liberal democracy in the West, and America retrenching with everything, you know, getting back and back and back in our conscience. That's maybe one of the most important impediments. So the future, the systemic future, is we are going down, limping ahead, waiting for someday when we'll understand that we need not fixers, but fixed rules of the game. But meanwhile, we'll be a very turbulent area with many repercussions for the outside world that we have to watch.
Lilia, that's brilliant as always. Thank you for sharing that. Courage is contagious. Moral indignation without the alternative will be hinder transformation. But one of the things you said is one of the biggest impediments is the crisis in liberal democracy. So let me turn. Clearly, Russians, Belarusians, Ukrainians, Armenians, Georgians, they're showing that they have agency in some respects over their own future. That's powerful here. That's what the two Natalias have spoken to as well. But no doubt there's a role for the United States and Europe. And so whether both in the context of supporting those on the streets in the region, or this challenge of presenting a model, a crisis in liberal democracy in Europe and the United States at home, I want to turn to David Merkel and Gigas Pavlionis to bring them in on this question about what, David, if you were back in your policymaking role in the administration at the start of a new administration, where do you think the United States should go to support this change in Eurasia?
Well, thank you so much, and it's a real treat to be with Lilia. I share Damon's comments about Lilia, but also Damon, I hope there's time for you to share some of your thoughts, because it was a privilege of mine to be a colleague of Damon's, and there's really no better person that you want to be a colleague of than Damon Wilson. I want to thank the McCain Institute and FIU, Go Panthers. I think that since we've had David Kramer in suit and tie this whole week, I think the FIU students should insist that he wear a Rory the Panther T-shirt to the conference next year. One of the things, Damon, that you and I worked on in government was a Black Sea policy. And the idea, very quickly put, was that the stability and security enjoyed by the countries on the west side of the Black Sea, because of their membership in the European Union and NATO, should be extended to those over on the eastern side of the Black Sea. That Europe should start looking at the eastern side of the Black Sea as a part of Europe, and a beneficiary of the strength and stability and prosperity. And I always wanted to think about it as extending not just there, but onto the Caspian, not as far as membership in these institutions, but simply the benefit of stability and linkages. But instead of the stability and prosperity and democracy going from west to east, we're seeing, through a result of what happened in Georgia, what happened in Ukraine, that really it's instead going from east to west. So how do we reverse that? How do we work to try and extend the democracy and the stability into these areas of the world? First of all, we need to be humble in this. A lot of people would talk about that it's been 30 years since the breakup of the Soviet Union, but it's been 10 years since the Arab Spring. It's been 60 years, more than 60 years, since most of Africa and Asia were decolonized, and obviously in our own hemisphere, democracy is not where we want it to be. So we need to pick our partners. We need to pick our opportunities. And I think in this regard, we need to kind of look at two simple questions, which is, how do we work on this issue to do better? And how do we have relations with the countries that are less than democratic? I think too often countries that are undemocratic but allies of America look that we continue to have relations with China or with Russia or with Saudi Arabia because we need something from them, but they don't benefit as well. With regard to Belarus, it's a bit amazing. I don't know whether it speaks to the naivety of Congress, whether it speaks to the naivety of NGOs, or the difficulty of Belarus, or the change in Russia. But I remember during the Clinton administration, when I was the foreign policy staff person for the House leadership, we were encouraging the Clinton administration to raise democracy in the meetings with Yeltsin, to make sure that Yeltsin encouraged Belarus to be more democratic. So we definitely need to see that things have changed. And I think those things are a lot what has been talked about already. which is working more with our alliances. I'm looking forward to hear what our Lithuanian colleague has to say. I note already that Lithuania and Latvia are pushing the European Union to institute sanctions. And we also need to, it's amazing. We looked at the end of the Soviet Union and thought about Russia, that the economics and demography would certainly lessen their control of the former Soviet Union, of their neighborhood. And high oil prices and other things has helped them hang on as a regional power. But as they decline, we thought, well, obviously the thing that would replace that would be US and European democratic values. As we look at it now, what is replacing Russia's influence? It's China, it's Turkey, and it's good old homegrown authoritarianism. So we need to identify what the issues are, not think that we can solve everything just in addressing Russia, and work with these countries one at a time. And finally, the last point I would make is it is very important to work with these countries, even if they're not the type of democracies that we would like them to be. I think the last administrations, and perhaps even extending beyond that, woeful attention towards the Caucasus has resulted in what we had hoped to be a peaceful resolution in the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh into a certain resolution of the war. It's definitely over, and the occupied territories minus the capital of Nagorno-Karabakh is with Azerbaijan. But the result is that Turkey and Russia are more powerful there, and Russian peacekeepers, something that the Azeris always wanted to keep out of the Caucasus, are there and likely there to stay. Thank you.
David, thank you so much for that. And before I turn to Zhigis, it's full disclosure to all the students that David Merkel, David Kramer, and I have had the opportunity to work together. I see Dan Fried is in the audience under the tutelage of Dan Fried, in full disclosure. And these were extraordinary policy entrepreneurs. It was a pleasure working with you, David. Can I push you before I let you go, David Merkel? The South Caucasus, Central Asia, you were speaking to this. The winds of change afoot in Eurasia look a little bit different, where some are worried about what's happened in Georgia since its changes. We've seen Armenia's own distinct revolution, and really just it's a different conversation in Central Asia. So you started to speak to this, but how do you see what's playing out across Russia, Belarus, Ukraine? How does that influence what we were going to see in Central Asia? And how do we navigate that approach that you were just suggesting, where the US needs to engage with governments and partners who don't exactly have strong democratic credentials there?
Well, one very positive thing that existed in the last administration was the C5+1. So it was a forum where the 5 Central Asian powers countries could get together and meet with their US counterpart. Much more can be done with this, and it can really be made a much more positive thing. But the powers in the region are China of tomorrow, Russia of yesterday, and Europe and the US kind of somewhat distant. And the Belt Road Initiative is playing a big role in Central Asia in 3 different ways. In the Kyrgyz Republic, which just had another presidential change, and in Tajikistan, which the president changed his name, but he didn't change in office. It's debt diplomacy. In Kazakhstan, it probably has the other 2 aspects of how the Belt Road Initiative is seen in Central Asia, which is infrastructure and greater strategic importance. So I think that when we're confronting China and the Belt Road Initiative in Central Asia, we're not replacing that infrastructure dollar for dollar, but there is a lot we can do as far as enhance our strategic role in Central Asia, and also to be mindful of what they are doing on the debt diplomacy issues. But there's another opportunity just recently as far as the southern gas corridor from Azerbaijan, which can push gas beyond Romania on into other parts in Europe if it's linked up with Tajikistan. I think we have very modest a modest role in Central Asia. We don't have that much investment dollar. We don't have that much development dollar. We don't need to make their relations with Russia and China more difficult, but we do need to be very clear about what distinguishes us, and that's anti-corruption, that's rule of law, that's democracy, and we need to find opportunities, even in absence of as much progress on those issues. We need to find opportunities to work with them on the security and the commercial side as well.
Thank you. Thanks, David. And love those maps behind you. Let me turn to, last but not least, our European colleague here. You've heard Natalia Arnaud mention the extraordinary role that Ambassador Pavlionis at Lithuania has played in support of Russians. If you don't know him, he's been at several iterations of State of the World. Ambassador Pavlionis is one of the most extraordinary freedom fighters. He is always pushing us to be better, to do more on principled moral leadership. He's part of the reason why his own country, Lithuania, is anchored in NATO and now there's such strong voice. But Žygis, how do you balance what we should be doing to support those on the streets of Eurasia demanding to determine their own future without fueling the trap that Lukashenko or President or Putin wants to say that the activists are only puppets of the West, that we're being manipulated through revolutions that the EU and the United States are fostering through their policies. Talk a little bit to the team about your strategy or approach to supporting this democracy process.
Thank you so much, Damon and friends. I will maybe continue with this line of Lilia with a lot of kudos to David, but I will kind of try to provoke you. Yes, it's Davos in Florida. I saw the chat. It's Davos in Florida with values, but I would, add Davos with values and Davos of doers, not of commentators. I was in all your events and in all reports and all debates. We comment about changes. In David Kramer's Still Freedom House reports, we all agree it's decline of democracy, global one. Started, I would say, from Bucharest NATO summit, but it's enough to comment changes in Eurasia. Let's start, dealing with those changes, and let's start changing Eurasia. And today it's a strange, interesting day. Today is the day when our common hero Tadeusz Kościuszko was born 275 years ago. Remember Saratoga, remember West Point, South Carolina. He was driving different strange people, sorry, no offense to my friends in London, from your country. He defended your country. He created the revolution. We were trying to fight, he was swearing to the Constitution. And I have another book of our common hero, Senator McCain. I was in Sedona and he said to me, Žygis, foreign policy is about changing the world, not talking about it all the time. And what's most surprising in this event? It's a bunch of doers here. I still remember Damon in NSC in the White House. I still remember David Kramer in State Department. Dan Fried, I remember you doing it with me. We were planning and doing it every day. And we changed the world, not only in the Baltics, all around. But something happened in 2008. And we are just defending. We are retreating. We are commenting. So, I have a proposal. Let's have this good gang of people and let's create another gang for the change. In a way, Dan Fried created it for us. How many years ago? No, Europe, Holland Free. And you did it, Dan. Thank you so much. I'm happy. 4 kids, good positions and fighting still and helping others. But let's create a team. Okay, let's improvise. Let's create a team for the legacy of Biden administration. What exactly we can do in 4 years? And, just 4 suggestions. New democratic elections in Belarus, short term, in months, not in years. Now they are dying there. It's urgent. And you know what? We can do it. We really can do it with Washington, Berlin, London, Poles, Lithuanians, little calls to Russians, maybe not so little, but still in OSCE, Helga Schmidt, good friends. I was speaking with her in Belarus, 15 years ago in Trakai, everywhere. We can do it, guys. Okay, maps for Georgia and Ukraine. You know what? You remember how many years passed after all those promises? I still remember Hillary Clinton in Chicago. I was sitting behind her back and she was saying, next NATO summit, maps for Georgia and Ukraine, promise. I remember, Kurt Volker making those promises to me. Hi, Kurt, where are you? So let's do it. I have a proposal, next NATO summit, well, not next, 2022 in Vilnius, and let's do it then. In a way, we did Vilnius 10 with you, and we did it. It's doable, guys. Just, we need your will. And then we will do the rest with the EU. You have Polish presidency in EU in 25 and Lithuanians 27. I think it's doable. Membership perspective for Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova. I think it's doable. And the last thing, of course, well, not the last, the first, the Russian democracy. When Kara-Murza is calling me every day and saying, Zhigis, do you remember January 14, 91, 500,000 of Russians standing for Lithuanian freedom? We were standing for you. We saved your lives. I was here at the parliament when Soviet tanks attacked us. It's 30 years anniversary, actually, this year of this attack. And we won. Little Lithuanians standing against the Soviet tanks, and we changed the world. So can we do it? Yes, we can. That was President Obama saying. So let's finally do it. And you know what? We don't need a lot of money, tanks, anything. We have our brains, we have experience, we have our money. We just need President Biden coming to Brussels to first NATO summit and first meeting with the EU leaders and saying, this is my will. I want to do it. Just words, policy, strategy, and we will do the rest. Thank you.
Zhigis, thank you so much for reminding us that this is about action and not just talk. Understanding the power of that word, it's the power of the imagination. When President Bush traveled and said, it's not how little we can do, it's how much we can do to advance that cause of freedom. The entire alliance went from thinking of small ball enlargement to a big bang that brought in you. So how do we actually rebuild that? I've got some good questions here from Sadie, Danny, Basike. I want to get other questions, keep them coming into the Q&A function, into the chat. We'll work through them, but let me dive right in. And I'm going to have my colleagues who are on the panel send me a quick note or just interrupt if you want to respond to what your others are saying. Let me start with Danny Terrell, who said, good morning and thanks for a great conversation. Danny's a senior majoring in IR in Russia. And his biggest worry for the future of Russia is what will happen after Putin, whether he is here for 20 more years or less, with a system where there is no ability for a successor to come about. What does the panel foresee for the future succession fight in the Kremlin, and what consequences that will have not just for ordinary Russians, but for the international system itself? So maybe Lily and Natalia, oftentimes, and we've seen this in Belarus too, the message of strongmen is if you don't want me, what comes next will be worse. So how do you respond to Danny? Maybe Natalia Arno, could you start with that?
Sure. For us at Free Russia Foundation, the biggest question is not like Russia without Putin, but or after Putin, but Russia is without Putinism. This is our biggest homework that we are doing at the moment by producing policy papers, discussing reforms, what can be changed, how we can make lives of Russian people better. And actually, this is what I was saying earlier, that we have why it's different right now, because it's generational split, because we see that younger generations want something different. They don't want Putin. They don't want anything associated with that regime. They are very open-minded. They want Russia to be a global citizen, a country to be proud of, not to be ashamed of, not to ask forgiveness of our neighbors, but to be doing something great together. Not only hacking, though there was some positive hacking when in Yekaterinburg they hacked a local TV station and put the video of Putin's palace there. And but also why we have this hope that it's this Russia without Putinism is possible, that we see more and more young generation. It's also how people consume information. It's very clear, two lines. Those who watch television, they are zombified by this propaganda, 24/7 propaganda. Though it's propaganda itself is becoming very, very primitive, and less people believe in it. And those younger people who take information from social media, from internet, from other sources, and these people want free Russia. They demand it. So that's why I'm optimistic, and I hope I answered this question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Can I ask Lila if you can comment on that as well? How's your connection, Lilia? Can you hear us? We may have to loop back for her if she has not connected there. I'll keep going with the questions, and colleagues, just let me know if you want to weigh in on some of these points. All right, so let me, from Besiki, Kutaladze, I realize the Russian government is the principal aggressor in the region. Yet given that the governments of Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, have failed to build peaceful and democratic coexistence for these neighboring nations, can civil society groups and communities form an alternative? Can they provide that? So if Lilia and Nino, for example, and that must be Nino, I think Nino is in the audience joining us from Georgia, I'm sure, can have so much of the shared vision for our future, can't that be the model for broader partnerships in the region? Can those very few good Russians and very few good Georgians become many? All right, so this is a power from Besike about the ability of civil society leaders, about people like Lilia and Nino to be able to help foster the alternative. So Lilia, I know you are back. Tell me if I'm being unfair and that you may not have heard the questions. If you have, jump in. If you haven't, I'll go to another colleague.
Damon, I just want to add one small footnote. Nino is our chief coordinator of the network. So we only have to disseminate what she's doing much broader.
Amen. Amen.
Domination above the fallen Russian Empire.
But seriously, that question about, look, I mean, there is principled moral leadership. It comes from people like you. It comes from people like Nino. How does civil society help present this alternative to the power structures?
My God. So this is the question to me?
Yes.
Damon, when we are talking about the Russian society, it seems to me that we, in the most, I would say, demoralized form, Russian society continues to breathe. This is what our Natalia Arno was talking about. And the fact that the younger generation is coming to the fore, the people between 24 and 45 years age, this is the sign that apparently my generation has failed to give an alternative to Russia, but the new generation is coming, and they will be much more forceful, much more courageous. And when we lost, apparently, the defeat wasn't the failure, it was just delay. And they will be probably turning our stumbling blocks into the stepping stones.
Thank you, Lilia. Natalia Kaliada, you have been a force in civil society providing an alternative. How do you see the network of like-minded civil society groups providing the animus for the opportunity for an alternative?
I will start from this one, and then we'll comment in terms of recommendations for American administration currently. So in terms of civil society, as our company, Belarus Free Theater, works underground for 15 years, this is how we build up that alternative to government structures. And we always knew that underground is much bigger than to be on the surface, because we could dig nonstop and we could provide that major challenge and provoke dictatorship. But what's happened in August and summer, I would say 2020, incredible things happened. Courtyards got organized in Belarus. It's residential buildings, and they build up their Telegram channels. And this is exactly a pure model of direct democracy in Belarus, when people demand what they want to happen. So, for example, they invite Belarus Free Theater to perform, and it's their desire that people, specific people, will come and perform for them, and they will provide full security for our actors. They will have a fully prepared van with a driver staying on standby. When they see riot police coming to arrest actors, the whole the bodyguards division of a courtyard is taking our actors in that safe van and driving them to a safe location, or they're taking them to apartments of local residents and they're keeping them till morning in order for them to live safely. But it's not only about theater, it's about the whole society. So courtyards are playing an incredible role, alternative role to the governmental one. And also we have a platform that is called Voice, Golos, where people are able to vote online. And for example, they showed that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya won when people been able to vote. And it's another very clear model that could be used. If we talk about quickly, I guess, on administration, a new administration, and also with a short comment that it's incredible. And I'm so happy that David Kramer left the government a couple of years ago, because we could talk with him almost every day and discuss exactly action as well as you, Damon. But what is amazing that Žygis Paviljonis now been chairman of foreign affairs at the parliament as talking as a freedom fighter. I think this is incredible, absolutely. And when Lilia Shevtsova is talking about contagious courage, I unfortunately always spoke about contagious of dictatorship. And I understand that it's exactly that particular thing that got changed. What is really incredible, what we have now, it's contagious courage against contagious dictatorship. And I think America exactly showed that example in November, December, and on the 20th of January, that contagious courage could wake up the whole nation. And also morality and creativity could put dictators into panic mode. And remembering that 49th coach, he said to his players that don't tell me, show me. So it's exactly how that particular action have to be put in place. It has to be very clear action, and US government has to be proactive and not reactive. And we need to understand, when we're talking about that we have the fear as the West jointly, that Russia and Lukashenko and Putin will say these are Western puppets that are manipulated inside of Belarus. But the West needs to stop fearing Russia, because it's a major, one big democracy, joint democracy. And it's necessary to understand that Russia has a hybrid interference into Belarus. Russia today is broadcasting from Belarus. So why the West is not talking about that? So the West need to say that Russia is interfering in Belarus, but not afraid of Russia jointly, and bring that change. And yes, I'll stop here,
Perfect.
but then when there is a minute, we'll...
I'll come back, Natalia, but Basiki's question struck a nerve, and I think Natalia Arno and Zhigis Pavlionis want to add a word on this idea of civil society providing alternatives. Natalia Arno and then Zhigis.
Thank you so much, Damon. Really great question, and also was inspired by Zhigis' words about doers. Very often when people are asking me, what is Free Russia Foundation? Is it a think tank? Is it a diaspora organization? I'm saying we are do tank. We are doing things, and actually this is what came to mind for us. Exactly in Lithuania in 2012, I was forced to flee from Russia on a 48-hour notice for my work for an American Democracy Promotion Organization. And at first, finding myself in Lithuania, I didn't know what to do, how to continue my fight. But there I realized activism doesn't end with borders. I can continue working on Russia. I can be very useful. I can do a lot of good things, connect people and do other stuff from any location. And this is how we established actually an informal embassy for Russian pro-democracy forces. We have an office here in Washington, DC. We have our hubs in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Eastern and Western Europe. And there are not few Russians, good Russians, there are more and more and more. And actually, it's still not a diaspora movement yet. Russians are still not, there is no term as Russian diaspora, as Ukrainian diaspora, Armenian, Jewish. It's still maybe some exiled pro-democracy Russian communities in many, many countries. But we are becoming more and more a global force. We are doing a lot of things. We are showing our new countries that there is an alternative. There are a lot of people who want those changes. We are bridges between those in Russia who are on the ground and continue resistance from there. So we are very instrumental in this regard. So again, activism doesn't have borders. And actually, in many transformations in Eastern Europe, in former Soviet Union countries, diaspora played a very important role. We remember how people were coming back to countries under transition as reformers, as members of government, to the parliament, as presidents, Baltic countries examples and Georgia examples. Again, this is a good alternative and also a good bridge between Russians on the ground and Russians in exile. Thank you.
Great, and we've got some more questions coming in that I want to get to, but Zhigis, why don't you respond quickly to that, and I'll come back. We've got sanctions, Russia and Western Latin America, lots of good questions here.
Building on that, Biden will invite Democracy Summit maybe by the end of the year. And I remember Hillary Clinton landing in Vilnius in 2011. She had a meeting with Belarusian dissidents who were, doing some technological stuff, how to fight democracy through different tools. And I was hearing during my term in Washington that maybe it's time to shift for American foreign policy towards societies, not to state actors. And I remember what Wesley Clark was saying in another conversation with Dan Fried. That's not anymore conflict between the states. Those are societies fighting. Those old autocracies like Putin regime or even China, they want you to fight 19th century war with tanks and meeting Putin, shaking. No, priority should be democracy, not Putin first, Russian democracy first. So in Belarus, if people are dying in the streets of Minsk soon half a year, and if they just want free and democratic elections, say it clearly from White House now. Do it. Just say it. Call Merkel. You know how to do it. And stand for the people, and change will happen. It took 2 years, maybe. Bush the senior, it was Senator Durbin coming here to the parliament after the attack of the Soviets. He went to Bush and convinced him, stand with Lithuanian people. Forget about the Gorbachev and all the rest. And you know what? It was a historic success. Look to us. You can do it with all the nations. It's not real politics only anymore. It's not 19th century. Think 21st century. Make societies as your top priority, as Blinken was saying, in the center of foreign policy, democracy and human rights. So mean it. Do it. At least in Belarus, it's a litmus test for your policy. like Baltic states were a litmus test for the policies, 30 years ago.
Thank you, Gigas. Let me get to some other questions, and I'm going to direct this one to David Merkel, but anybody else on the panel, let me know if you want to respond to it as well. It's about sanctions from Polina Doneva. Polina is a PhD student in information systems at FIU. Since Russia's 2014 invasion of Ukraine, Western powers have hit Moscow with numerous economic sanctions, hoping to stop Putin's aggression. Have these sanctions worked? Navalny's team is calling for more sanctions against Putin's inner circle. Can we expect that these sanctions will change anything? Russian government appears to be ignoring these sanctions and mainly uses them to portray the Western world as Russophobic and anti-Russian. David, when you're in the executive branch and on Capitol Hill, people turn first to the sanction tool. Speak to that, and then if another colleague wants to respond what it looks like on the ground, let me know. But David, first you.
Thank you. And in addition to NSC and State, I worked over at Treasury, and it was really during a great development of our sanctions policy, where the as we call them, the smart sanctions, the sanctions that focus much more on attacking an individual, their bank account, their travel, or sectoral, and tried to not have the pain go towards the population. So Putin may protest, but I do think that the sanctions are an irritant for those around Putin, and they can no longer invest and vacation in the West. There's a risk about grabbing the sanctions tool too often, about don't just sit there but do something. And there's a cautionary note about if we go too far, perhaps there'll be more and more of a move, principally by the Chinese, to lessen the dependence on the U.S. financial market. We are so far away from that. So I do think that it is right to look towards sanctions, and I think that there is a couple things that haven't been done yet. The head of Mail.ru, the person who did a comical YouTube video against Navalny and is a real suck up to Putin, Usmanov would be a great person to sanction. And Mail.ru is something that I think is used for very negative means by Putin and by the Russians. So I think that they should really look towards that. It was a failure of the Trump administration not to address that. It's something that other panelists on this program have written Congress about. And then it's worth. There was press reportings about Celeste Waller when she was in the Obama administration, talking about whether we should look towards Putin's own money. We really haven't looked towards that. The only transparency that's come on Putin's money has been from the Pentagon Papers. But I think that sanctions that irritate Putin and really drive the point home for the Russian population that this doesn't hurt me, this just points out corruption from the Kremlin and from Putin.
Thanks, David. And of course, your Treasury hat, very appropriate for that. Lilia, why don't you add a word on the sanctions impact on Russia? And then I'm going to cluster a couple things for you, Natalia Kaliat, and come back to you in a moment. But Lilia first.
Okay, Damon, I would like to mention maybe unpleasant thing for us. Firstly, the Kremlin has got accustomed to live in the situation of sanction. And the ruling elite understands that sanctions would continue at least through the end of Putin's leadership. Well, of course, it's a painful blow, but still sustainable, because the Russian elite has found different loopholes in the sanction umbrella. So I would pay attention to what Fiona Hill and Mark Carpenter said during the yesterday's session about necessity to also think about sanctions against the West. The West has to think about possibility to dismantle the laundry machine that still stays and survives intact despite of the Western sanctions against Russia. Just look at the state of Delaware, look at the UK, real estate, And maybe it's time also for the Western political community and Western intellectual community to think about ignoring or putting the reputation of intellectual and expert enablers in the West under question. So there is a lot to do, you know, on the Western field as well.
Thank you, Lily. And I saw Natalia Arno shaking her, just agreeing with that as well. But let me turn to Natalia Kaliata on the sanctions issue. But Natalia, can I add something? Sadie Testaseca, what a great name. I hope I got that right. Is a sophomore at FIU, majoring in international relations with a minor in art history, certificate in human rights, Holocaust and genocide studies. So her question is, how can art best support a democratic society? So Natalia, you have been the force behind the Belarus Free Theater. You have used art to extraordinary effect. Can you, I know you want to say a word on sanctions, but can you pick up the art question as well?
Yeah, of course, then I will start from the art. Just recently, we've been in touch with Tom Miller, and he does a great job with Pan America in Washington. And it's really amazing knowing him as politician, diplomat. I see him as a writer. And finally, I could say, see, Tom, how great to be both. And how to merge art and politics and human rights, because we are able with exactly that morality and creativity put dictators into that panic mode. And I could say, if we talk about Belarus, what example it brings. Last year, 593 cases of arrest of artists and organizations. Among 593 people, organizations, it's 500 people, artists, who end up in jail, exactly for that particular role that they play in society. 500 people went to jail because they stood up only with hope and dream and joint space where they're able to inspire people. Our audiences come back to us in July of last year and they said, can you start to perform again face to face? And as you know, in Belarus, Lukashenko doesn't recognize COVID, but we put our company into lockdown anyway. And in July, we released them from that lockdown because our audience wrote to us and they said, we go to jails and images of your show help us in jail. And I think this is exactly that power of art. If we're able to make safe even mental space for our audiences in jail and keep them going there, this is the major. And another one, it's an incredible quote by Ernesto Cardian. He said, fantastic phrase. He said that poems of today will be basis of constitutions tomorrow. And this is exactly that particular moment when we need to keep remembering. If poems, poets, artists, musicians are not able to create those poems, there will be no based on freedom, new constitutions. I'll stop on that and move to sanctions. But all of it is absolutely connected because when we talk about people of Belarus, because currently people of Belarus driven by enormous creativity, I would even say that artists themselves took a second place because artists played a major role within 26 years. But now it's people who are driven by that creativity and they create enormous thing. But people in Belarus currently have a very I would say a huge disappointment in the West in terms of sanctions that West put into place because it's very symbolic sanctions. They are not bringing that major result that could be brought already in August. In August, we spoke with David Kramer and Damon with you in July that we must try to do it now. And now it was August. And unfortunately, today we are in February. I remember 2011 when we had a personal meeting with Hillary Clinton and I was there with Irina Krasovskaya, who is an incredible friend and family member. And we spoke with Hillary Clinton directly about sanctions. Sanctions after elections of 2010, then been also falsified and 2,000 people got arrested, been put place by America within a month. 1 month, we got targeted sanctions, economic sanctions, and financial sanctions. And then we were able to release political prisoners. What is happening now, I understand, and I hugely, enormously appreciate our friends George Kent and Stephen Biegun for working in impossible conditions and putting what was possible to put. But now, when we got to new administration, we need to understand that it's necessary to get new executive order. We need to put all those money bags under sanctions, because people of Belarus made their choice in August, and they said, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, our president, and we shouldn't worry at all in terms of how Russia will or Lukashenko think about the West. What's happening by not putting money back under sanctions? The West is not caring about its own democracy. This is exactly what's happening. We do not ask the West to help. We say, people in the UK, you must, or EU or America, you must think about your democracy, first of all, because money bags, all Putin, Lukashenko enablers and beneficiaries, they're located here. They have major properties. Gutseriev, for example, and his family has property more than 200 million in the UK, Cyprus, and so on and so on. Put sanctions against them and protect your democracy from kleptocracy and autocracy, and protect your countries first of all, and then it will come to Belarus, Russia. We will be able to stabilize again Ukraine and go to Central Asia, as we discussed. So we need to think about sanctions and other measures that isolate the regime from sources of income and opportunities to support law enforcement. While Lukashenko has money from his money bags, he will support law enforcement. While he has law enforcement, they will continue to kill, arrest, and torture people and build up those concentration camps. And this is where we need to understand that it's time to act. Otherwise, there will be no single chance.
Thank you, Natalia. Really important message there. I want to pivot and look south. We all wish that we were in person in Southern Florida with David Kramer right now, enjoying the warm weather of Florida. Next year, hopefully we will be. But when you're in Florida, you're drawn south. What's happening south? Obviously, the crisis in Venezuela, Nicaragua, all this. And so Regulo Diaz has an important question. He's an FIU student. Maybe I'll see if David Merkel can address this, but others, let me know if you're tracking Russian activities in Latin America, and I'll come to you. But he said basically in 2013, John Kerry, when he was as Secretary of State, declared that the era of the Monroe Doctrine is over. And yet today, the presence of Russia, along with China and Iran, is greater than ever in the past in the Western Hemisphere. What do we think about that? What do we do about that? Maybe, David, I'll start with you, and then I'll ask my colleagues as someone's tracking Russia's activities in the region to weigh in. Gigas. Okay, so David and Gigas, kick off.
Well, it's a great question. And obviously, when we think about what they're contributing, they're not contributing to Western values and democratic values and business with great transparency. But obviously, Moscow is very seized on Rosoboronexport, the arms manufacturing markets, and a lot of our military equipment have restrictions on it, and it's of higher quality and more expensive, and therefore sometimes the Russian equipment comes with far less paperwork and is a good price and benefits the people who are shaking hands with Rosoboronexport to make the deal. So we should be concerned about that. We should be concerned about Moscow's and Iran or China's influence in the hemisphere, and we should be concerned about what values they're pushing. I really enjoyed something that Bob Kagan said yesterday, which is basically he said, if the U.S. and Europe are not advancing our values, it's not like nothing is happening, but other ideas are being communicated. Now, we do have a bit of a limitation here because we need to see open commercial markets and open access in countries that are geographically closer to Russia or China. We are a global power. They are regional powers. So we certainly need to make sure that we are sophisticated in the way we communicate this message. But we should definitely compete with those in every market around the world, and be very clear about the negative aspect of different relationships that can come without it coming across as a zero-sum game.
Thanks, David. We've got 10 minutes left. So Zhigis, before I turn to you, I'm going to add a question to the queue for you, Zhigis. Danuta Mazika, apologies if I got that wrong, but hopefully I got it right. How can civic organizations in the West, such as the now 40-year-old Baltic American Freedom League in the United States, help in promoting the human rights and democracy such as we did 30 to 40 years ago? The next generation wants to link up. What a great question. How to empower the next generation of these civic organizations in the West to empower. So Zhigis, can you take on both of those?
Okay, so I think that could be united into one. Okay, let's take Cuba, just to show how it can work. Do you know that my parliament is the only parliament in EU that blocks EU-Cuba, Communist Cuba agreement, because we hate that it doesn't cover human rights and democracy, and we do it because of our convictions, and not only because we come to Florida sometimes. So we can help fix it from EU side. But when I was calling to Washington and trying to say, so what's the next move? I don't hear it. Damon, with you and David, we've been doing a lot before 2008. We've been coordinating it. There is no coordination on democracy. When I mentioned Belarus and I said elections, what's the plan? Let's do it. Who is calling whom? I just need action. It's enough of talk shows, And now returning to the last question, it seems from Lithuanian background, remember President Reagan, he was standing with our, Lithuanian or Baltic immigrants. I have 700,000 Americans of Lithuanian descent. My embassy was open during the occupation. And when Reagan came to the Berlin and said, tear down this wall, he was very clear. Nobody wanted to believe it. I need Biden administration to say it. I am now standing with Belarusian people, like McCain was doing every time he came to Vilnius. First meeting was not with Lithuanian authorities, but with those Belarusian dissidents. He is the true example of what we can actually do. So just plan it. Let's have a planning meeting. How do we do it? And we can do it. And listen to those civil society organizations, because they simply say truth that we do not always listen to.
Thank you, Zhigis. Thank you. So we're getting close, but I want to catch Betsy Suero Skip has said, follow the money. Can the work of the Panama Papers continue to expose and bring down governments? So maybe Natalia Arnaud and Lilia Shevstova. Natalia, you can broaden that because you are really driving serious investigations, working some of them with our Atlantic Council team, some related to Panama Papers, some not. But what's the power of whether it's Panama Papers or these deep investigations to expose, bring down governments? And Lily, if you want to add some comment to help us wrap up, please do. But Natalia Arnaud?
Yes, our Free Russia Foundation conducts a lot of investigation of, again, follow the money is a very important question, and everything about sanction discussion previously should be connected to that. And first of all, those should be sanctioned who are wallets for Lukashenko's regime, those who are wallets for Putin's regime. Then again, everything can develop much faster. In 2019, Free Russia Foundation conducted a very in-depth study of how the Kremlin undermines, it was called misrule of law, how the Kremlin undermines the Western institutions through different surreptitious campaigns. What we learned that actually it's absolutely global, subtle operations targeting the rule of law, bribing prosecutors, doing some stuff which is actually quite legal in the West. Like it's legal to open an NGO, but how the Kremlin is using very often those NGOs or some other initiatives, it's another story. There was a question about Latin America. There was a chapter in this report about Guatemala, and actually it's also my experience that started in Lithuania and then in Poland and here in the US, that how long and deep Kremlin's tentacles are in the West, how like deeply rooted they are. And again, as my colleague, Vice President of Russia Foundation, Vladimir Komurza, likes to remind that the biggest export from Russia is not export of gas and oil, it's export of corruption, but it's two sides of one medal. It's if somebody exports, somebody imports. So again, it's very important to have that in mind, and again, not to enable those in Putin's regime, in Putin circles and or Lukashenko circles. But also about sanctions, its timing is very important. We in Russia, we have a proverb that a spoon is good when it's a lunchtime. So sanctions should be like very brief, very immediate, connected to some events. Poisoning of Navalny, immediate sanctions. This brutal repressions against peaceful protesters, immediate response to that. This is what we may be lacking a little bit, and that's what we would like the Western democracies encouraged to be very, 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 very fast on that. And maybe also another thing is, and it's all political will, of course. And another thing that Natalia Koleda also mentioned, that this is, we need something beyond just verbal criticism or just statements of outrage. They don't impact Lukashenko regime or Putin regime. And those are dictators, so they should be considered as a legitimate rulers of our countries. After elections in Russia during all years of Putin's regime were never free or fair. In 2018, when Putin was elected, two major candidates were not participating in the elections. Boris Nemtsov was assassinated near the Kremlin. Navalny was banned from elections. But after Putin circumvented the constitution last summer, his should be even more illegitimate. And again, kudos to Lithuania, who immediately was saying that Lukashenko is illegitimate, calling Svetlana Tikhanovskaya president-elect. We need things like that from the West more. Thank you.
Sorry, Lilia, I'm talking. Do you want to weigh in with that? And as we come to a closure, Lilia, speak to that issue, but also the bigger issue where we began. Natalia Kaliata at the beginning, after Svetlana's intervention, reminded us that these are different. You can't just have a template for Georgia, Armenia, Ukraine, Russia, Belarus. But there is a sense of inspiration and connection, something's afoot in Eurasia. And you put the burden on us for our failure in the West as well for the crisis in liberal democracy. If we are able to entertain a renewal of democracy in the West, can we see a fourth democratic wave really take root by beginning in Eurasia this time? Help weave this together to close us out, Lilia.
Damon, you will see that you've made a mistake giving me the word now, because I would like to be an optimist, but at the same time, it seems to me that I need to stress at least two things. Firstly, the problem is that there are a lot of windows, there is a lot of inspiration, there is a lot of ground for social activism, but at the same time, our intellectual, analytical, political community now is still intellectually paralyzed, because before we can make a new breakthrough, we have to think what went wrong, what are the failures, how to deal with misperceptions with our fallacies. We have to do a lot of redemption yet. This is firstly. And secondly, before taking to the street, or maybe while we are taking to the street, we have also to think what would be the next model of transformation? Because at least post-communism is totally different transition than transition from the communism. It's much more difficult, much more painful, valley of tears, because liberalism has discredited itself, and because of this merger between power and property. So it will be totally different model. It will be totally unique valley. Nobody knows how to go. And maybe we, Russia hands, and maybe experts in the West, because they also are bearers of fallacies and illusions. We have to think together. In any case, we have to think about one dramatic issue for Russia. Can Russia be transformed? With only 15% of Russian population supporting liberal ideas. So this is a big question mark. So before starting this valley, we have to do a lot of redemption.
Lilia, thank you. It's not wrong. We need your sober note. We all know that hope is not a policy. And so I just want to thank everybody. This is an extraordinary group of people who do bring bold ideas, who do bring an ethos of hard work and a real focus on results. And it really underscores the agency of individuals, the agency of societies. And that's what we're talking about, people's ability to determine their future. And these things don't just happen. It happens because of a community of folks like you who provide the intellectual framework, the intellectual muscle, the political capital, and viable roadmaps. So thank you for sharing all that. It's been a great conversation. I think we got through the questions that came from the FIU students. It's great to be with you. We only wish we were with you in person next year. I'm going to hand it back to David Kramer. We are all here today because we believe in the principles that form this conversation over a couple of days. And that reflects David. That reflects David Kramer in his principled leadership. We are not just all in his fan club because he's a nice guy with a sense of humor, but it's because we have been so inspired by his own leadership and his friendship. Back to you, David.
Well, Damon, thanks very much, and back at you, if I may, and to all the panelists. Fascinating conversation. I can't thank all of you enough. And we stretch from Phoenix with Dave Merkel to DC to London, I think, Natalia, that's where you are, and Vilnius and Moscow. So this was a pretty global conversation, absolutely fantastic. And if there is a silver lining in this awful pandemic, it's that we are now operating virtually and are able to bring so many different voices together. So fantastic. Thank you very much. Can't thank you enough. We are going to take a break here and come back at 12:15 Eastern time for our next panel, Challenges in the Middle East. In the meantime, grab a bite to eat and return for the rest of the afternoon. Thanks again.